Well, good evening from London, and thank you all for tuning into my talk, which asks the Muslim Brotherhood, another Haman. As you know, last week was Purim, and Haman is, of course, the evil advisor to the King of Persia, who was plotting to commit genocide against the Jews. And thankfully, they were saved by Queen Esther and her uncle Mordecai. So, is the Muslim Brotherhood a modern day Haman? How committed is it to violence, and to what extent is it driven by anti-Semitism? If you have not heard of the Muslim Brotherhood, you will have certainly heard of Hamas, an acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement in Gaza. And Hamas is one of the offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood. And here are some of the offshoots. Now, somebody asked ChatGPT for a list of terrorist groups and what religion they were associated with. And ChatGPT came up with this list. Apologies that number. Whoops, excuse me. Gosh, that's. Here's why. Terrorism is just one second. One religion. Terrorist acts are committed by individuals and groups from various backgrounds. Apologies for that. That was Siri was answering my question about terrorist groups. Anyway, so if you can't see number 20, that the full name of this movement is Tehreek Nafaz Shariat Mohammadi. Now, there is a distinction to be made between Islam and Islamism, which I will try and explain later. There are internal differences between all these groups. Some don't see eye to eye and have even come to blows. On occasion, violent Islamists have acted alone. They are often called lone wolves if they commit isolated acts of terror. They might not belong to any of these groups officially, but all broadly share the same philosophy of political or radical Islam, also known as Islamic fundamentalism. And this is the philosophy of the Muslim Brotherhood. You might have heard of Ed Hussein, who has spoken for Lockdown University. And I've got his book here. Hussein was a young British man of Bengali heritage who wrote a book called The Islamist. Hussein was initially captivated by the Muslim Brotherhood's vision of a Muslim utopia and joined an international Islamist network. But he subsequently left the network after he witnessed a murder by a member of his group. And he tells this story in his book. When he was a student, he had the following quote on his bedroom wall. And this developed into the Brotherhood motto: Allah is our Lord, Muhammad is our leader, the Quran is our constitution, jihad is our way, martyrdom is our desire. You might imagine that the Muslim Brotherhood was founded quite recently, but actually it was established almost 100 years ago and known as the Ikhwan, or Society of the Muslim Brothers. And from the very beginning, Islam was central to the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, who thought of themselves as brothers in the service of Islam. The society was founded by Hassan al-Banna in the city of Ismailia in Egypt in 1928. This was no accident, as Ismailia was the port city at the mouth of the Suez Canal. The canal was built by the British and French. It was a vital artery linking Europe with India. But the canal also represented the ultimate in colonialism and the exploitation of the local Muslims. So Al-Banna was a scholar and a school teacher. At age 12, Al-Banna joined the Society for Moral Behaviour, and this was the start of a lifelong devotion to religious affairs. He enrolled at a teacher training school in Cairo. He taught Arabic in a primary school in Ismailia and later in Cairo. He was appointed by 6 workers of the Suez Canal Company as their leader to protect against the tyranny of foreign monopolies and exploitative companies. The Muslim Brotherhood began as a social movement and set up charities, schools, hospitals, universities, and business enterprises. And this was and remains very important because it's really designed to attract the maximum number of followers. Islam sees the world as divided between the realm of Islam and the realm of war. Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. The Caliphate ruled the realm of Islam, holding both religious and political power. Until the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, the Caliph or ruler of the Ummah or community of Sunni Muslims had been the Turkish Sultan. 2 important things had happened before Al-Banna set up the Muslim Brotherhood. The first was that the Ottoman Caliphate collapsed in 1924, and there was nothing to replace it. The second was that the colonial powers, namely Britain and France, were ruling most of the Muslim world. Egypt was nominally independent, but the British had troops on the ground to protect the Suez Canal. Al-Banna wanted to return to the Aslaf. Salafi Muslims were the followers of Muhammad in the 7th century and represented pure Islam. He saw modernity as the main obstacle to the caliphate. The movement then became involved in politics. Its objective was to set up a state ruled by Sharia law under a caliphate. Islam was the solution. Islam huwa al-hal. To achieve this, the Muslim Brotherhood needed to end British rule in Egypt and throw off the colonial yoke through jihad, holy war. At first, Al-Banna tried to maintain a tactical alliance with the government, but gradually became more and more hostile to it, to the point that the Brotherhood assassinated the Prime Minister, Mahmoud Fahmi al-Nakrashi. But that was in 1948. In its first decade, the Muslim Brotherhood attracted only 800 members. At first, it focused on setting up Sharia law through the subjugation of women. After the Nazis took power in 1933, the Muslim Brotherhood came under their influence. It was the Reich that taught the fundamentalists to focus their anger on the Jews instead of women. The Nazis poured men, money, weapons, and propaganda training into the Brotherhood. This is a cartoon dating back to the 1930s or 1940s, and it shows the colonial powers. There's America, there's Britain, France, and controlling all the colonial powers in the background is the Jew who's standing behind all the others. And they're all trying to dislodge the rock of Islam. The scholar Matthias Kunzel made a study of the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and how it came under the influence of Nazism. And I've got a couple of his books here. One is called Jihad and Jew Hatred, and the other is a recent book called Nazis, Islamic Anti-Semitism and the Middle East. So Matthias Kunzel says the Brotherhood were a community of male zealots which took pleasure in unpleasure, projecting all their hatred of pleasure on the Jews. Like the Nazis, they were dedicated to the restoration of male supremacy. Women's place was in the home, subjected to men. At this point, with tensions rising in Palestine, anti-Semitism or Jew hatred became the core of the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy. A key reason was that the Jews were the agents of modernity. They were the interface between Europe and the Arab world. Jews were the drivers of change. They stood for secularism, women's rights, and minority rights. But this was an affront to true Muslims because Jews and Christians were traditionally subjugated minorities. Under colonialism, the Jews had equal rights. But in the messianic society envisaged by the Muslim Brotherhood, they should revert to their inferior dhimmi status under Sharia law. They should know their place. Traditionally, Muslim rule only had contempt for them, not hatred. The non-Muslim minorities were despised because they had failed to convert to Islam. But they were allowed to practice their religion. But they did deserve to be humiliated at the same time. In the 1930s, the Muslim Brotherhood imported a new element, and that was European and Nazi anti-Semitism. The idea that Jews were conspiring to eradicate Islam and dominate the world. This is where Islamism, the all-embracing political movement, diverges from Islam, the religion. The Jews were no longer a defeated minority under Muslim rule. They had become malevolent and all-powerful. And the Muslim Brotherhood distributed Mein Kampf, Hitler's memoir, and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Tsarist forgery, which had been translated into Arabic in 1925. And these were justified with texts and verses from the Quran and the Hadith. Matthias Kunzel says, the Brotherhood came to the conclusion that not only everything Jewish is evil, but that evil is Jewish. A jihad or holy war was a religious obligation against the Jews. What is also new is that the Muslim Brotherhood came to legitimize violence as a useful instrument of politics. Before the Muslim Brotherhood, the meaning of jihad was mainly interpreted as internal struggle. The Muslim Brotherhood would exercise the art of death. The members would march singing, "We are not afraid of death, but we desire it. How wonderful death is." The ultimate redemption for a Muslim was to die a martyr. Suicide bombings were permitted if they advanced a political purpose. Members of the Brotherhood conducted assassinations and attempted assassinations on Egyptian state figures during al-Banna's lifetime. And in the 1930s, the conflict in Palestine became a focal point for the Brotherhood's activities, which were largely financed by the Nazis. In 1936, the Arab Revolt broke out against the British in Palestine. The Brotherhood's promotion of the Palestinian cause led it to become a major force in Egyptian politics. They organized volunteers and material aid. The Muslim Brotherhood cemented an alliance with the Mufti of Jerusalem, who you see here, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who would later become the Brotherhood's representative in Palestine. And the Brotherhood and the Mufti worked together to usher in a new caliphate based on Sharia law. As we know, the Mufti himself was a virulent anti-Semite who envisaged the extermination of the Jews in his sphere of influence. And as Hitler's guest in Berlin during World War II, he collaborated with the Nazis. And here he is at his meeting with Hitler in November 1941. Although al-Banna never conceived of Muslims as a race, the Nazi ideal of the Volk was mirrored in the Muslim concept of the Ummah. Language, culture, and blood ties were what counted. Sorry about this, just jumping a little. Language, culture, and blood ties were what counted. Communities, not individuals, were what counted. And Matthias Kunzel writes, we have the memos, the planning documents, the budgets, even photos and films of the Reich's spectacularly successful campaign implemented by the Muslim Brotherhood to turn the Middle East into a hotbed of virulent Jew hatred. We have the minutes, the photos, and the memo of understanding when Hitler and the head of the Muslim Brothers in Palestine, the Mufti of Jerusalem, shook hands on a plan for a final solution in the Middle East. Due to Nazi influence, the Brotherhood grew from 800 to 200,000 members in 1938. And by 1945, they had 1 million men under arms. They organized on fascist lines, and their influence spread beyond Egypt's borders. In 1945, November 1945, students from the Muslim Brotherhood, together with leftists, organized a pogrom. They burnt 3 synagogues and inflicted great damage on the Ashkenazi synagogue in Cairo. And this is how the synagogue looks today after renovation. They also destroyed Jewish property in Cairo. With the establishment of Israel imminent, the society prepared for war. Volunteers entered Palestine as early as October 1947. Al-Banna promised 10,000 fighters, although only about 1,500 had arrived by March 1948. Back in Egypt, an armed wing of the Muslim Brotherhood was linked to bombings and political assassinations. The government tried to dissolve the group, which it considered subversive. The Brotherhood responded by assassinating the Prime Minister Mahmoud Fahmi al-Nukrashi in December 1948, and Hassan al-Banna himself was assassinated shortly thereafter, possibly with the government's blessing. As well as calling for a boycott of Egyptian Jewish merchants, the Brotherhood incited violence against the Jews. Until the 1952 revolution, which toppled the king, King Farouk, and in which the Brotherhood was suspected of being involved, every demonstration against the British occupation became a violent demonstration against Jews and a pretext to destroy Jewish property and businesses. Jews were being rounded up for Zionist activity, which was now illegal. Martial law was declared, and the assets of many Jewish firms were confiscated. These official measures were accompanied by more attacks by Islamists on Jews and their property. The year 1948 was a terrible one for the Jews of Cairo, particularly in Haret al-Yahud, the old Jewish quarter. When a bomb exploded on the 20th of June in the Karaite quarter, 22 Jews were killed and 41 wounded. The Levy family was particularly hard hit. The only survivor was an 8-year-old boy, Yosef Levy, who lives today in Herzliya, Israel. The authorities initially blamed infighting amongst Egypt's Jewish population. They also blamed fireworks stored in Jewish homes. The press and even the local Jewish newspaper censored the events. That terror attack was followed by 5 more attacks on Jewish sites in Cairo during the summer and autumn of 1948. 2 Jewish-owned department stores were bombed. A blast in the Jewish quarter in September killed 19 people. One source puts the total number of Jewish deaths due to bombings and other attacks at 70, but some say as many as 200 were killed. Truth be told, the government was not strong enough to stand up to the Muslim Brotherhood. Prime Minister al-Nukrashi did finally dissolve the organization on the 8th of December, but 20 days later, as I have said, he was assassinated by a member of the Brotherhood. The government then began the first of a number of crackdowns on the Muslim Brotherhood. The society was banned. Its offices were closed and its funds seized. Hundreds of Muslim brothers were interned. So were communists and Zionists. And Zionists and Muslim Brotherhoods rubbed shoulders in prison. And there are some accounts that they actually got on quite well. We now come to a second leading figure in the Muslim Brotherhood, Sayyid Qutb. Qutb was a prominent intellectual, the author of 24 books, as well as novels, works on literary criticism and education, while he was an employee of the Egyptian Ministry of Education. He became the Muslim Brotherhood's chief ideologue, and his writings are often more familiar to radical Islamists than the Quran itself. His work continues to influence jihadists in the Middle East and beyond to this day. Born in 1906, he was raised in a village in Upper Egypt. His father was a landowner and secular nationalist. Only in the 1940s, after a failed love affair, did Qutb turn to the Quran. He had problems with women. He raged against singing, loose morals, and scantily dressed women. "How I hate and despise this European civilization," he wrote in 1946. He was sent to the US to study its educational system for 2.5 years. His horror of Western decadence intensified. the US turned him into an ardent anti-Westerner. Rather than building caring communities, he thought the US cultivated selfish individualism. Sayyid Qutb wrote the book Our Struggle with the Jews, and this helped shape the Brotherhood's anti-Semitic ideology. Jews were the eternal enemies of Islam. There can never be peace, there can never be compromise, only religious war until victory. This view continues to influence the Brotherhood's stance and its support for its Hamas branch. He wrote, the conflict between the Judeo-Christian world on the one hand and the Muslim community on the other remains one of ideology. World Zionism and Christian imperialism, as well as world communism, are conducting the fight against Islam and the Muslim community on ideological grounds and with the sole aim of destroying this solid rock. The image of the rock again, under attack. Note that the threat comes from Zionism and Christianity and not the other way around. After the 1952 revolution, the secular Egyptian regime ruthlessly suppressed the Muslim Brotherhood and it went underground. 6 of its leaders were tried and executed, and Sayyid Qutb spent 15 years in jail where he was tortured, and he was hanged in 1966, and here he is in jail. Many leading Muslim Brotherhood figures went abroad, with Qatar as the main destination in the Middle East. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, his dates are 1926 to 2022, who went on to become the Muslim Brotherhood's global spiritual leader, made Doha his home. He was the main financier of Hamas via a coalition of over 50 charities known as the Union of Good. And this was designated as a terrorist organization by the US Treasury in 2008. Yet others chose to settle in Europe and America. You might have heard of Tariq Ramadan. His grandfather, Saeed Ramadan, was the son-in-law of Hassan al-Banna, and he was the father. So he was the son-in-law of Hassan al-Banna and the father of Tariq Ramadan, who founded a Muslim Brotherhood center in Geneva. A third figure called Yusuf Nada, who died in 2024, moved to Switzerland, and he went on to become a key financier of Muslim Brotherhood activism in the West. Qutb introduced another revolutionary idea which distinguishes Islam from Islamism. The Quran never advocated for the whole world to become Muslim, but this was unacceptable to Qutb. Islam should strive to abolish all these systems and governments which are based on the rule of man and not Sharia law. The duty of true Muslims is to remove these ciphers for Western imperialism in order for states to become pure theocracies. As Ed Hussein puts it, we had to gain popular support of the Muslims to remove these regimes and create God's government on earth, Allah's law in Allah's land. Qutb set down these ideas in a book called Milestones, which is described as the Communist Manifesto of Islamism, and Qutb smuggled it out of prison. Ed Hussein says Milestones was mandatory reading. True Muslims had to regain the upper hand in Muslim countries and reject the culture of the West. Jihad was the only answer. The global jihad became the credo of al-Qaeda, which fought the Soviets in Afghanistan during the 1970s. They believed that attacking the US and its allies, they were called the far enemy, took priority over their war with the local regimes, the near enemy. The nearest Islamism came to establishing the caliphate, the perfect Islamic society, it was really a mini caliphate, was when ISIS or ISIL or Islamic State swept through northern Iraq and part of Syria in 2014. ISIS, I'll call it, began as a faction of al-Qaeda. They massacred Yazidis and Christians who refused to convert and took the women as sex slaves. But ISIS have also attacked Shia Muslims, whom they consider even worse than the Jews. And the leader of ISIS, or Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, originally belonged to the Muslim Brotherhood. And Qutb was Baghdadi's chief influencer in his early years. In the 1970s, the Brotherhood re-emerged in Egypt. It officially renounced violence. Instead, it has tended to try and infiltrate the political system to transform it from within. It has rebranded itself as a moderate and democratic movement. It has even produced an Islamist prime minister in Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, although he didn't last long. The tide turned against him once he declared himself to be above judicial review, a step which alerted Egyptians to his Muslim Brotherhood politics. Islamist groups have been known to make tactical alliances that seem to contradict their ideological principles. The Iraqi branch of the Muslim Brotherhood joined Iraq's post-Saddam US-backed government. The Israeli government coalition under Yair Lapid included an Islamist party. Islamists have a strong political presence in Morocco, Tunisia, and Jordan. Hamas and Islamic Jihad are financed by the Shia Iranians, although there is not much love lost between Sunnis and Shias. Charities, NGOs, student bodies, and other organizations have served as front groups. For instance, in 2020, the European Parliament held a hearing on Islamic Relief. Islamic Relief was founded by members of the Egyptian Brotherhood. Members were accused of anti-Semitism and of giving support to terrorism. Once voted into power, an Islamist party which wins a democratic election might never hold another election. And this has been true of Hamas, which won elections in Gaza in 2006. Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, the leaders of al-Qaeda, I'll see if I can get them back on the screen. Here they are. They were the leaders of al-Qaeda. And they both began as members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they remained faithful to the idea of a global jihad. Amongst those groups that have not renounced violence is Hamas. Hamas was founded as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1987. It remains committed to genocidal violence, the destruction of Israel and Jews generally. You only have to read the Hamas Charter of 1988 to see that it has espoused Nazi ideas that Jews control the world and were behind the French and the Russian revolutions. And what's interesting about this extract from the Covenant is it quotes the original founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, who said Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, just as it obliterated others before it. And then it goes on to talk about the Jews were behind World War One. They got the Balfour Declaration. They were behind World War Two, etc., etc. Palestine has once again become a popular jihadist cause, as it was in the 1940s. And Hamas champions a nationalist version of jihad. They actually altered their covenant in 1917, but it still pledges to destroy Israel. So yes, it champions a nationalist version of jihad, and this approach has brought it into conflict with the caliphate-minded al-Qaeda, which perpetrated the 9/11 attacks on the US, because they are still wedded to the idea of global jihad. Hamas purged Gaza of all al-Qaeda linked groups. I'm sure you didn't know that, because I didn't. There is another connection which is not much talked about. The Muslim Brotherhood is linked to the Ayatollahs of Iran through an organization called the Fedayeen of Islam. The group was directly inspired by Sayyid Qutb. The Fedayeen of Islam was responsible for the assassination of 3 Iranian prime ministers in the 1950s. The Fedayeen's founder, Nawab Safavi, met Qutb, and Qutb influenced the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini, who incidentally listened avidly to Nazi broadcasts on Radio Berlin. The current supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, only ever had 4 books translated from Arabic into Persian, and all were works by Sayyid Qutb. The Islamic Republic even produced a stamp honoring him. As you can see at the top there, there's Qutb behind bars, because he spent 15 years in jail in Egypt. And the stamp at the bottom there is of Safavi, who was the founder of the Fedayeen of Islam. Khamenei also met and was profoundly influenced by Qutb. The political and administrative system of the Islamic Republic is based on models advocated by al-Banna and by Qutb. So, is the Muslim Brotherhood another Haman? I would say undoubtedly. Whether or not they advocate violence, all these disparate groups have one thing in common: a hatred of Jews. And here's a rather horrific example of Jewish power, the devil himself. Qutb's ideological descendants have assimilated his virulent form of anti-Semitism, casting Jews as responsible for all the ills that have befallen humanity, and Muslims in particular. Like Qutb, Ayman Zawahiri, the al-Qaeda leader, would refer to both Christians and Jews as enemies of Islam and implore Allah to annihilate the Americans and Jews and the hypocrites and apostates who help them. In 2004, the Brotherhood ideologue Yusuf Qaradawi accused Jews of spilling Arab blood and declared, "There is no dialogue between us except by the sword and the rifle." The idea of Jews being the enemies of God, cast out of favor because of their transgressions, is not confined to well-known extremists like Qutb and Zawahiri. It has become entrenched within the Islamist narrative. The Islamic Republic of Iran denies the Holocaust even as it promises a second one. And as we have just marked Purim, an earlier attempt at a Holocaust in Persia, we must remember that Iran still presents the greatest threat to the Jewish people today. So on that rather pessimistic note, I will finish. I'm very happy to answer questions if I can. Okay.
Can you locate the questions at the bottom of the screen, Lyn? If you sort of hover your cursor,
Questions?
there's a little box that says Q&A. There should be a red 6 there. If you click on it.
Yeah. Is it Shelley Shapiro is the first one?
No, oh yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is. Okay, yeah. She asks, under Ottoman rule, were all their territories governed by Sharia law? In principle, yes, although the Ottomans were not very strict at applying Sharia law sometimes. It depended on who was the caliph. And apparently, I think this is actually true, that no Ottoman caliph actually visited Mecca, which just goes to show that they weren't that religious. Monty says Qatar is an entity ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes. Hamas is run from there, and Qatar uses its wealth to influence America, where it has funded schools and universities. And America has a base there, I think, military interests, certainly. Result, no pressure on Qatar to rein in terrorism. Anti-Semitic Al Jazeera based in Qatar. And Israelis have business links with Qatar, so surely Qatar is the camel in the room. Yeah, I agree with you there. Bob, shalom, Lyn. Yes, you do follow me on Harif. Thank you. Oh, you're in Nebraska. Okay, I learned recently that Hitler was interested in Purim because he felt allegiance to Amalek and Haman. Okay. Hitler desired a second Purim, I guess with a different ending. Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Nazis seem to know about Purim. Which was the Nazi who actually died saying you've won or something. Anyway, Yehuda says how certain sectors of Western media gushed when the Brotherhood thrived during the Arab Spring and how they wailed when Morsi was toppled. True, very true. Morsi was president of Egypt. not Prime Minister. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sure you're right there. Correct. Morsi was sworn in as the first democratically elected president. Yes, I stand corrected. Shelley, Coptic Christians make up around 10% of the Egyptian population. Does Muslim Brotherhood and its offshoots want to commit genocide against them? That's a very good question. Actually, they did incite against the Coptic Christians back in the 1930s and the 1940s. I don't think they want to commit genocide, but they certainly have attacked the Coptic Christians. There have been cases of churches being set on fire. Copts have been persecuted by the Muslim Brotherhood. They certainly object to Coptic Christians. They want them to be subservient dhimmis under Muslim rule. Qatar today. Well, I think there was a very good summary of Qatar today. Qatar today has its tentacles in America, and it controls the Muslim Brotherhood, or rather, it finances the Muslim Brotherhood. And as was already said, it is the camel or the elephant in the room. What was the Jewish population of Egypt in 1948? Well, certainly a lot less than it is now. It's probably about 100 million. It is huge. It is the biggest, it is the Arab country with the largest population. Oh, thank you, Ruth. And Marion says, why are the Sunnis and Shiites at odds with each other? Well, it all goes back to a quarrel amongst Muhammad's descendants. It's a bit like the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. They are at odds with each other. There are certain theological differences. I think that they have made a tactical alliance. Certainly Hamas is an example of a tactical alliance with the Shia Iranians. And once they no longer need each other, they'll probably fight each other. Thank you, Lisa. Could I comment on Hezbollah? Well, Hezbollah means Party of God, and it is actually a Shia party based in Lebanon, also funded by the Iranians, also believes in a theocracy. That's what the name means, ruled by God and not by man. And they are also obviously very anti-Jewish. They are sworn enemies of Israel. So I think in terms of ideology, they don't differ a great deal from the Muslim Brotherhood. And their sort of main support comes from Lebanese Shia. So the Muslim Brotherhood was set up by the Nazis, not the Soviet Union. I didn't say that the Muslim Brotherhood was set up by the Nazis. I said that the Muslim Brotherhood was inspired by the Nazis. Definitely not the Soviet Union. In fact, they were sworn enemies of communism. The communists and the Zionists were the enemies of the Muslim Brotherhood. So is Iran a bigger threat than Qatar? Well, Iran is a bigger threat than Qatar because it is on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon, which it would probably not hesitate to use against Israel. But Qatar is a very big threat because it pulls the strings, it finances the Muslim Brotherhood, which, as I hope I have sort of said is quite a threat to the Western world and certainly the Jews. Yes, James says the Muslim Brotherhood established schools, clinics, and a welfare system to gain popularity in Egypt. This is how Morsi was elected president. Yes, there's always been this side of the Muslim Brotherhood, the sort of the side that looks after the welfare of its members. And this is exactly what James says, that this is to gain popularity, to gain followers. That's right. Thank you, Uta. It was Julius Streicher who died yelling Purim Fest. Thank you for that. Why was the synagogue in Cairo restored? There can't be many Jews in Egypt. Well, actually, a few synagogues have been restored in Cairo. It's mainly for reasons of tourism. That's usually the reason why Arab governments restore synagogues. But you're quite right. There are not many Jews in Egypt. Perhaps 7 or 8. Certainly not enough to make a minyan. But the government has adopted a policy of sort of restoring the odd synagogue in order to appeal to tourists. Sandy says, what was the religious political situation in Alexandria? Well, I don't think it was quite as bad because, well, obviously the seat of government was in Cairo, and the Muslim Brotherhood was mostly centered in Cairo, but it was probably also represented in Alexandria. Alexandria was a much more cosmopolitan place. You know, it had a whole different variety of nationalities and who lived there. It was a cosmopolitan port. And I don't know of any incidents that happened in Alexandria that were, that were incited by the Muslim Brotherhood. And thank you, Rita. Is that the end of the questions?
Looks like it might be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much, Lyn, for
No.
being with us today.
Well, thank you, and thanks to everybody for joining me. Have a good evening.
Yes. Good evening and good night to everyone.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.